this evening, it's a great pleasure to have back at the Foundation Julie Brook. She was one of the finalists in our Art Prize last year and had an exhibition here as part of that. And particularly when I saw Julie's work, with its strong emphasis on the kind of tactile qualities of materials, I thought, we've got to get Julie to Japan, and I'm happy to say that she shared that view. So tonight's talk is Julie Brook's Japan. So you've seen Joanna Lumley's Japan on the telly, but this is Julie Brook's Japan, and she went in June, I think it was, this year, and we did our best to introduce her to lots of relevant people, and I think she had a pretty good time. So Julie, over to you to talk about it.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. It's absolutely wonderful to be able to talk about Japan, but I do need to warn you that I was only there for 3 weeks so far, so it's from this rather amazing trip I've had in June. So I'm going to structure my talk in 2 parts. The first part is as a high-speed part, just to give quite a few of you in the audience do know my work, and have the familiarity, and will probably understand why I've got this fascination with being in Japan and wanting to go there. But for those of you that don't know my work, I wanted to give you just a brief introduction to my main concerns, just so that there's a sense of, you can get a sense of why I would want to be there. And then in the second part, which will be the bulk of the talk, I want to tell you about the trip I had. And principally, there are 4 key things I want to tell you about. The first 3 things are actually 3 very remarkable artists I met, whose work I was really bowled over by, and who I very much hope I might be able to work with in time. And the 4th thing is the quarries that I went to visit. But I'm just going to start with the work. I am, well, it's sort of great as an artist not to be categorized, but I work in the landscape, and I am a painter and I draw a lot, but predominantly I make sculptural work. My main interest is to go into landscapes, preferably the wilder and the more remote the better, and to respond to them, and to make work that I feel has a resonance with the landscape itself and how I can respond to that. And so inevitably, because of that, the 4 elements are a very big part of the nature of the work. And the first few pieces I'm going to show you are very much integrating various of the elements. This is a piece that I did in the Isle of Skye, where I'm based, and it was a temporary piece. It lasted for a year in the Clandonnell Gardens in Skye, and I managed to persuade them to let me dig up their front lawn, which I've been told subsequently I'd never been normally allowed to do by the current director. And the idea was, it's quite a formal geometric piece, but I'm very interested in work being able to exist both in daylight and at night. And this piece, Inversion, is also very preoccupied with the notion of space or the void as the sculptural form. This is when it is lit with firelight in the early evening. And this is when it's in daylight and also in sunshine. So this work will sort of very much tie in with a little bit work a little bit later on. Light and shadow and reflected light is a very important part of my explorations as well. And at night, this piece has a very it has an extraordinary presence because it gives out a lot of light at night, but it has a very marked boundary where it becomes then pitch dark. And I'm hoping this is a more informal performance piece with friends and family, but I'm hoping it's something I could take into a more formal environment as a collaboration in a public space, possibly in a park. And I just wanted to show you this piece. I'm based in Scotland, as I said, but I spend a lot of time in the Outer Hebrides, and and also in the Hebrides. My first island I spent a lot of time was on the Isle of Jura on the west side, and I've more recently, until about 2011, spent many years on the island of Mingulay, which is an uninhabited island at the very, very southern tip of all the Outer Hebrides. And I was painting there a lot, but also exploring sculptural work. So the piece you saw just now, it was first explored as an earthwork just on one of the plains of ground in Mingulay. And it also introduces something I'm really interested in is the way in which when you make a work, how it sort of offsets or shifts rhythms around. So particularly if you've got quite a formal piece like this, how it in a way enhances the organic rhythms of the landscape. Water, another element. This is also in Mingulay, and something I'm very interested in sculpture is in a sense our discovery of it, so that it's not immediately, it's not about an object, it's about discovering these shifts or realignments or changes in the landscape. So this stone ball was made very much as an expression of the beautiful bowl-like shape on the east side of Mingulay, on the west side of these very, very vertiginous cliffs. So it's got this incredible contrast between the two. And so I made the stone ball, I just dug this concave shape and lined it with stone, but in fact what I realised, it fills up with rainwater when it's really wet. And I hadn't particularly thought that through, but in fact it fills right up to the brim. So it has this beautiful reflective quality when it's full. And it does it all itself, so it's a sort of perpetually changing piece. And this inspired another public commission at the Hidden Gardens in Glasgow, where the Tramway Art Gallery Museum is. Fire. You'll see that I'm a bit of a pyromaniac when it comes to using fire, but when I lived on the west side of Jura, I lived again in a very remote part of Jura, and I was using fire and collecting water every day and using fire to cook on. And at a certain point, because I was using all these elements for my practical way of living, I really wanted to bring these particular elements together, and that's when this was in the early 90s, that's when I really started beginning to make sculptural work outside, finding materials I used. This particular piece was inspired by a volcano kettle that some of you will know about in the audience, but I don't have time to explain. Where it was not a tidal piece, but where the flame became intrinsic to the structure of the work. And the fire stacks. This is a piece that was or a work that was really exciting to discover in Jura, where I wanted to bring all four elements together in conjunction with one another. And these works are tidal works. They're very physically demanding because you're effectively building between the tides. And the idea is that I'm building this column of stone. I use dry stone walling a lot for my work. And then the tide comes in and they wrestle with one another. It was a very, I think also I've always drawn a lot, and when I'm teaching students, I'm very keen for them realise how broad that notion is of drawing. It's not just about drawing on paper, but it's drawing outside, it's drawing, whether you're drawing with film or drawing even through photography. It's a very, in a way, it's a state of mind and a way of being drawing. And for my mind, it's a little bit like breathing. One of the very common things in art schools at the moment is quite a lot of students think drawing is old-fashioned. And I think drawing doesn't go out of fashion. It's just something that is a very valuable part of our being, and it's a language that we all acquire even before speaking. And this particular piece was exciting because it began to make me understand how to draw with light, in a sense, and also what it feels like when you realign materials temporarily, how that creates an incredible shift in dynamic to where you're making the work for that moment in time, and sort of enables a completely different perspective. This is at dawn. So, I hope that's not my phone. Okay. In about 2008, I was given the opportunity to go to the Sahara Desert in Libya, and something that I couldn't currently do. And I had a really extraordinary time. I went right down to the southwest, where at that time people could visit Libya, but you could only travel with a local guide, which was, having been very, very solitary in my work, this was an incredible revelation, because I was quite frightened about going to the desert. I didn't really, being a northerner, I didn't know how I would cope with the heat, and it was incredible to be walking. I was walking with Tuareg and camels, so going very slowly through the desert, but also being taught how to live in the desert well and be able to work. And I was hugely inspired being there. I just couldn't. I had just gone really to make work in drawing books and just get a feel of it, and I found I just could not stop making work out there. A lot of it's very, very temporary, what I would call desert drawings, where I'm just, again, realigning materials. This is on the plateau just before we got to a big volcanic crater, and these are sort of strange volcanic plates, very, very friable to walk on. And I had just finished creating the piece when it's the only time it's rained in the Sahara Desert, but it started raining for about 10 minutes and then just stopped very abruptly, and that's what has created this extraordinary metallic sheen on the plates, and then about a minute later it was all absorbed and became very dry again. But again, with this piece, the sharpness of some of the work is really designed to sort of, well, it's not design's the wrong word. I'm motivated to do it because I'm so, it's in a sense, inspired by what's already there, and it's like a way of responding to what is already there. So as the desert drawings grew and gained momentum, I went back for a second year, and I was taken into the central desert, the Al-Harouj al-Aswad. In the center of Libya, there's this enormous area of black volcanic desert, and it is all of this black volcanic stone. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's very austere and very beautiful, but very difficult to imagine anything or anyone living there. But I absolutely love the sort of purity, in a sense, of the landscape, and was moved to start making things in a much more, in the three-dimensional form. And this piece was the beginning of that. And I realized when I started making the first rising line, I realized that it was necessary to make a second rising line, and it became suddenly much more a dialogue between these two forms within the environment that I had made it in. Just to give you scales, I'm sorry I'm not really giving you scales, these walls are about 10 meters long each. And then I subsequently went back down to the Jebel Akakos mountain area and created this two air rising lines. And this piece took me a lot longer to build. These are 20 meters long and required, yeah, they were more tricky to build. And I was back with my Tuareg guides for making this piece. I wanted to go back to Libya, but as you know, it went to war, and I then, in search of other deserts, chose to go to the Namibian desert, and I have subsequently been working there for the last 6 years, and it has been an incredibly rich time to discover, explore, and again using that method of walking and working with guides. And in fact in Namibia we travel with a 4x4, it's a bit faster than camels, but amazing to go. I'm focusing, all my work has been focusing in the northwest of Namibia, where the Himba Herero people are, and they're still in tradition, and my guides were Himba guides taking me through these areas, and the relationship I built up with the various communities I've had permission to work in is incredibly rich. So my plan, I've been invited to go and exhibit at the National Gallery of Namibia in December of next year. And my dream, if I can raise the money, is to then take the work, take a sort of mobile exhibition and take it up through all the communities that I've been working in and create a film installation in these various communities. So the pieces had to, the spirit of being in the desert in Libya sort of came with me, but I really had to start all over again because Namibia is so different, and I would say much more of a semi-desert. I didn't really go into the Skeleton Coast area because that's complicated, it needs permits and it's very expensive to go into, and I wanted to be in much more local communities. So riverbeds were a very important part of responding and making work. And I guess the forms tended to be connected with riverbanks or blocks in various forms, either carved out of earth like the suspended block, or built as I'm going to show you. And it was also where I became it's sort of almost like I really reconnected with a very expressive form of drawing, in what I would call sort of gestural drawing, and was really excited about using drawing and film together. So a lot of, although I'm showing you by slide just for the sake of time, I've been exploring, and then some of you have seen big film installations where I can really explore the materials and the visceral nature of the work through film and sound. This is, I won't linger on this, but this is amazing pigment that I've been privileged to go and collect in Achide in the northwest with Himba girls who the Himba women wear this red pigment on their skin and go mine it down this sort of shaft-like cave where it is just pure red ochre. And I have also made films about us mining this pigment together. Light and shadow. I also became, the light was particularly, it was very particular in Namibia, where the shadows are so absolute. When there is a shadow, it is so dense and becomes almost like a void or a form in itself, which was very exciting for me, having explored already in Scotland that notion of the sculptural form being a void. And these riverbank works were so often not really about the physical thing I was making, but actually the shadows the sort of dynamic of the shadows they were creating, and in a sense the sort of optical strangeness of them. And that then, I'm not quite sure how it led to that, but I then went into this valley of amazing stone, and I think in an oblique way, the riverbank work had really opened up this idea of voids and spaces, and I began building, in a sense, building spaces around big existing boulders. I loved the idea of, in a sense, creating space that really pushed you against the quality of these massive boulders. So although I'm using walls as part of the work, I don't see them as the work, but the spaces I'm effectively creating. And then I explored them through film, and I've become incredibly excited about passages of light, morning light, evening light, and how these change, and how I might express them through the moving image and through sound. And then my more recent work, was given permission to work in this extraordinary disused marble quarry, again right up in the northwest, very, very difficult to get to. And subsequently I needed more help, so I was able to bring more of the locals in to come and help me. And traditionally they don't use stone, but they were very quick to learn how to work with the stone. And this is the first work I made there, called Divided Block 1, and it has a diagonal channel running through the rectangular block. So I suppose I had been making these, in a sense, these spaces around the boulders, and it was incredibly exciting then to work with, go back to a solid form, but to be working in the right environment, putting the stone effectively back into these voids where the stone had been taken. This particular block it has a passageway. The passageways tend to allow for us to just walk comfortably through them, so sort of just a little bit wider than shoulder width, and they're a good deal taller than us. And so these spaces of the passageways are important, but also this particular block takes the evening light, so the sun sets in the passageway and comes round into it with this very beautiful emerging blade of light, and then sets in the passageway. And again, using a moving image is a very exciting way of exploring these, in a sense, slow times of work, as well as the faster times of making and building. This is the, last year when I was there in the summer, I built the second piece called Divided Wall, and this was in a space that was not quite perpendicular, but a little bit sharper an angle, more like that. So I was able to respond to that angle. And this takes the morning light, so the emerging light, coming straight through the aperture, or the space between the two walls. And then I was allowed to make this third piece, which was really exciting as well. It's a very big scale piece, where it charts the midday light, so it has a very harsh passage of light. It doesn't have the emerging or the setting of the light, and so it has a very, very different dynamic to it. And just briefly, because I need to quickly get on to Japan, sorry. This is my current work. I'm working in a very remote part of North Paris, Outer Hebrides. If you haven't been, you definitely need to discover the Outer Hebrides. They're amazing. So just to hop across the water from Skye, and there are a few people in this audience who have been helping me make these works. They featured recently on a BBC4 documentary with some of the other land artists like Richard Long and James Turrell and David Nash, and my part was Coast. And so revisiting the fast stacks, but with so much more experience of filming and experience of everything actually. So I'm finding it a very exciting work to re-engage with. And I feel again, there's so much about space and time and rhythm, and this is work I really want to explore in my next exhibition. Sense of scale. Okay, sorry, I'm racing on now because I've been far too long on that. Japan. So the first very exciting thing about going to Japan was going over Russia. And going over Russia all the way virtually. And poor Stella, I took my second eldest daughter, who is currently in Nepal, so is unfortunately not here tonight. She just finished school, so I asked her if she'd like to come, and she said yes. And she had to, she was subjected to me elbowing her all flight, which I think is about 12 hours, isn't it? Because, and I got told off by the air hostesses because I never wanted to shut my blinds, and it never got dark on the flight. But the notion of going for most of the way over Russia was utterly thrilling. I don't think I've ever found an aeroplane trip so exciting. And then to arrive in Tokyo, bit of a shift. This is a very brief introduction to Stella. On top of the Mori Art Centre, where our first day we went to meet the most wonderful curator who I met at Daiwa, called Mami Kotoeka, and she was happy to meet us for lunch, and it was very nice because it was really meeting her at the evening of the prize giving of the Daiwa Art Prize. She said to me, I just met her for 10 minutes, and she said, "Jules, you must just come to Japan for a few weeks." And I liked her so much, I thought, yeah, I'm just going to do it. So it was really great to meet her on our first day, although we were a bit hazy, not least because we hadn't slept. But incredible to be in a city where you can't see the city not ending. It's extraordinary. And thanks to Jason helped me enormously in setting up my trip, and also introducing me to the Daiwa office in Tokyo, where I was looked after by Kuna-san, and they were able to, they enabled us to stay in the International House in Japan, of Japan, which is right in the centre of Tokyo, but with this absolutely beautiful garden. So it's a very serene place to stay. And the first day we went to the, after we'd met Mami, we went to the Meiji-jingu shrine, and it was incredible to discover about these thresholds, something that I'm very interested in, the notion of walking from one space of effectively your ordinary everyday life into just walking through the threshold and perhaps regrouping your consciousness and going into a more contemplative state. I also, on the third day, gave a public talk in a gallery, again thanks to Jason. I was put in touch with a very charismatic guy who lives in Tokyo called Johnny Walker, and runs an art foundation there, and he managed to find me a gallery where I could do my talk, hosted by a fantastic guy called Kurosaki-san, who enabled me to give the talk here. And they found an artist who was prepared to translate for me as well. And we'd met about 2 minutes before the talk, and he was amazing at sort of doing what I'm doing, but translating everything in Japanese. It was incredibly exciting. And this was the first meeting. Susan from the Daiwa Foundation had said to me and Jason, said, you must meet this amazing artist called Naoya Hatakayama, who's exhibited here, and he's this fellow here. And in fact, also the other two people who were very important are Takeshi, one of the other artists I met, and his writer wife Yukiko, who were just here. And you'll see more of them in due course because they were incredibly important for my trip. But Naoya, I don't know if anyone, probably, well, a few people will know his work, but when Jason showed me his work, it was like, wow! It was so exciting. It made me feel like I hadn't really punched high enough in scale yet. This is from his Blast series. He's a fine art photographer, so he doesn't make things in the landscape like I do, but he started exploring quarries. What he's really interested in is the relationship between man and the environment. But his work is incredibly physical and very visceral. He's recently had a residency in Mexico City, and I was lucky enough to see the exhibition from that work. And he's currently working in France. He works all over the world, and he's very celebrated in Japan. But it was incredible that he came to my talk. I was so happy to meet him, because you can see why from looking at this work. It's just absolutely fantastic. Just of a scale that I only dream of, because I make it with hands. But and these, I'm sorry, the images aren't great, but he also did a series of underground river explorations, and I haven't seen these for real. When he prints at a very big scale, and they're incredibly beautiful to look at and explore in a sense. They're very, very alive, but these spaces were look extraordinary. So, after my few days in Tokyo, I met up with Yukiko and Takeshi, the artist and writer I briefly introduced you to. And Takeshi had been the first John Schuler scholar up in Skye. There is a scholarship, an artist in residency, a very generous scholarship each year for that is sponsored by the John Schuler Foundation. And he was the first artist, so that's how I met this wonderful couple. And they had come to my studio, so they knew about my work. And I said I really wanted to explore quarries. Well, Yukiko just was extraordinary what she came up with. She took me to Oya, and I gathered from Jason that you've not been, is that right? And in fact, I've spoken to quite a lot of people who either live or are from Japan who also don't know about Oya. But if you go to Japan, you have to go to Oya. It is a very, very old quarry that is now, the main part of the quarry is no longer working. But I think it's one of the most beautiful and breathtaking spaces I've ever been into. And this shows you the sort of environment that you go to when you first go to the quarry, with these incredible spaces cut out on enormous scales into the side of the cliffs and stacks that are there. And then this is going into the vast chambers themselves. And that space, you can see, get a little bit of the scale, but we're talking way bigger even than our cathedrals in Britain. And that particular space was all cut out by hand over hundreds of years, block by block by block. They worked out that a man could carry an 80-kilo block, which is 3 bags of coal, 20-kilo bags of coal, 4 bags of coal, which I can tell you is really heavy. And and they would take them on their back out, running down sort of they like bamboo ladders really that were put up onto the walls with pegs. And it's just incredible to think of a person extracting that, or people extracting that amount of material out of these spaces. And it's huge. It goes on and on into chambers and more chambers and more chambers. It's sort of like going into a network of natural caves, except you know that they've been carved by hand. So this is the texture of when it is carved by hand. So each block is loosened by simply chiseling around it and levering it out, which creates these beautiful ribbons of lines. And then subsequently, right at the back of the quarry, they did start machining it, and these are the ribbons of cuts that were made. Incredibly beautiful natural shafts of light coming as well. And because Yukiko is very full of energy and exploration, she started talking, she and Stella started talking to one of the guides that take people around the quarry, and Yukiko told him of my interest in stone. And he then took us to this amazing working quarry right next to the big Oya quarry. So the same stone. A lot of this stone has been used for, all the big castles in Japan, all around Japan. You can see it's a sort of yellowy, creamy stone, and it has these rather wonderful air bubbles from when it was formed, which get filled with orange earth. So it's a very, very charismatic stone. And so he allowed us to explore in his sort of land, effectively, which he's mining himself, this guy, this fellow here. And he then invited me to go and work there. So this is my first invitation to work in this quarry. And you can see these air holes just on that left-hand side. Again, scales that I'm very envious of, but I'm sure I'll find a way of, some way expressing the scales. And as a consequence, we spent so much time in Oya. We had to run round the Temple of Nikko, which I know it shouldn't really because it's so enormous, but it was a very exhilarating way of seeing Nikko, and that's us just being asked to leave because we were so late in arriving. Again, through this wonderful stone threshold. And another thing which Stella got very annoyed by, but I'm very interested in drains because they're so fantastic, and kept filming them and taking time over them, which she found a little bit perplexing. But and another thing that I'm very interested in, you'll see, when I was at Oxford, I went to the Ruskin in Oxford. I studied Japanese ceramics and built loads of kilns to make pots and fire them, and was very excited to show Stella a climbing kiln. I didn't make kilns as big as this one, but it was a really big part of my experience at Oxford, and a very important part. So it was incredible to revisit this. I don't know if Adam's here, but there's someone who might be here who I used to work with in that. And this is the wonderful Takeshi here, and fantastic patient Stella, and Yukiko, who I owe so much to in her incredibly imaginative way of taking me to various parts of Japan, like Oya. So Takeshi is the second artist I want to introduce you to. He's also a fine art photographer, and he specialises in making platinum prints. He doesn't have English, so all my communication is through Yukiko, but they're an amazing couple. They have a small flat in Tokyo, but they have built their own house in the sort of about 2 hours north of Tokyo in the Alps, and all out of wood. He began as a conceptual artist making installations, and he found the experience of making his house, and they bought a bit of woodland, and they then built this house out of the wood that they cleared and chopped, And he found this such a profound process that he then decided to start becoming a photographer. And he spends weeks and months wandering through the really wild forests in Japan, of which there are many. And when I asked Yukiko what specifically Takeshi would like me to say this evening, she said that it's really important that we know that he only ever takes one image in one place. So he will maybe, and sometimes she said, sometimes we are walking for weeks and he still doesn't take anything. And I'm saying to him, but this is so lovely, and he doesn't say anything. And she has amazing patience of a saint, and because she's carrying half the stuff. And he works with a large format camera, needless to say. He's a very, very gentle man, but very clear about what he wants. And their house is really beautiful. It's a combination of practical and also traditional. She has a really lovely tea room in their house. And we had many rich conversations about work. He said that we were talking about music, and for him, visual work is very, very, very connected to the language of music. And he even said that there are times when he is walking and walking for these weeks, and then it's at that moment that he begins to hear things, in a sense, a form of music, and he understands that this is a moment to take an image. And they have this very painterly, contemplative quality about them. This first few images are part of a big series called The Silent Respiration of Trees. He's travelled all over the world. He's been doing a lot of work in Galicia and northern Spain. He's actually in Yosemite. And sky. I couldn't resist. Yukiko managed to get me these, I think, about half an hour before I arrived here, but it's really wonderful to show you something of... So Takeshi was in Skye, based in Skye for about 6 months, and they were so enterprising. They travelled through the Western Isles as well, and quite a lot on the mainland. This is in the north of Skye, in an extraordinary place called the Quarry, looking back onto the Cooling Ridge. And Callanish up in Lewis, not so far away from where I'm working currently. Sake brewery. On one of the, sorry, a bit of an abrupt change. On one of the, we seem to do many things in a day, but one glorious day we did a diversion to a sake brewery. And of course you get lots of tastings, and sake is really strong, which I learnt at my peril. So it was wonderful to go in and see how they make sake. And a brilliant thing, this round ball is changed every year, and when the sake is ready, a new ball is put up of fresh, isn't it fresh leaves, or I'm not quite sure, and then everyone knows that the new batch of sake is ready, and they all flood in to buy it. And yeah, a lot of tastings, so I was a bit worse for wear heading out of that place. This is just giving you a flavour of the landscape in which we were travelling. And then she took us to the Misoji Shrine, which is, I think it used to be in Tokyo, and then they moved this shrine into a more rural and peaceful area. And it's a really beautiful place, but they also built this theatre on the water, and they have one performance every year of no drama. She was incredible. Of course, I really like the way the roofs are made as well. strange sort of compressed bark. And the food, I know I'm meant to be talking about work, but the food in Japan was so incredible. And over, Stella and I were bowled over, and Yukiko, after one of our very long days, managed to cook us prepare us the most beautiful traditional meal, temporal and all sorts of things. It was wonderful. And this is their house where they live as much as they can, although they do also live in Tokyo. And their surrounding, I was also riveted by the paddy fields. I'm sure some of you who know my work a bit better, you would understand why, because of the water and these incredible dividing lines of the fields. I thought they were fantastic. And we got up very early one morning to go and see Mount Fuji, which is so incredible. I know it's on every picture in Japan, but it is such a beautiful thing to experience. And we were there, we went very early in the morning and walked right high up a very obscure pathway in a woodland to have this view, and within about half an hour to disappear. Takeshi was working and Stella and I were just drawing. And then we came down and there was this enormous windsurfing competition. So it was a really strange juxtaposition between the early morning of looking at Mount Fuji and then this huge barrage of beautiful butterfly-like windsurfers. So we then left Takeshi and Yukiko, and I took up this incredible invitation from Kurosaki-san to go to the Komatsu Quarry and stay in a farmhouse that he's just renovated. This was the person who hosted my talk in Tokyo. And it was amazing. We were met by the vice mayor of Komatsu and press, and it was all very exciting and surreal because we didn't really understand what was going on. But they then provided us with a translator and some of the local council people to take us around this quarry. And I met the 80-year-old owner, and the reason why I'm showing you this is I've also had an invitation to work here, and I'm going to show you about that. So this was the translator, and this fellow is 80 years old. Who was fantastic showing me around the quarry, and he has been quarrying this all his life, and it's been in his family for 5 generations. So an amazing thing. And this is where they're working currently, extracting stone on a daily basis. He's still full-time, and he works with his grandson in the quarry. And this is the stone. He said I can have any amount of this, what they call waste stone. So I've got a beginning. He said you can have lorry loads of it. So I'm very happy about that. That's where I plan to begin my next trip. And this is actually in a garden nearby in Komatsu, but an amazing carving of a staircase that I'm just going to. And another 700-year-old moss garden right by the farmhouse where we were staying. Another drain. This is the farmhouse that I would be staying in when I go back to work in the quarry. It's absolutely beautiful. Something else I was bowled over by were these huge, wide floor planks in all the temples and shrines and bridges. They're just so beautiful. And if it's in a place where there have been many feet, they get worn according to how soft or hard they are. They're very particular. That's the nature of the wall. I'm sure I'll be using that material sometime. And then a quick, very fast trip up to Hokkaido. We took the train all the way up and spent the night in Sapporo. And I went to meet a professor of Ainu studies at the Sapporo University. But I wanted to show you that because I became, in fact, I'll just show that again. I went up to I went over to the west side to Akan, where they have amazing hot clay and hot springs. And I did also go to the Ainu village there, but I found I didn't have a guide at this point in Hokkaido, and that really made a big difference, because I did meet the most amazing Ainu musician, Atui, but I felt hugely handicapped by the fact that we couldn't communicate. And it's something that I feel I need to re-explore with somebody, because in Akan there is an Ainu village, but I felt it was incredibly orientated towards tourism, and I felt really uncomfortable being there, which is sort of, I think, why I didn't take any photographs. But so that part of my exploration, I feel I've only just touched on and has yet to be explored. But I really like the bubbling clay. So I managed to persuade Stella to get slapped in it and stand out in the lake. See how long suffering. I'm sure I'm going to have to pay her back at some point. So we then went up to Shiretoko, which is right on the northwest of Hokkaido, and is a climate that suddenly we were back in snow, and this is in June in Japan, and much more resonant of Scotland, but extraordinary. And we went into the park, but Stella was really worried that she had heard about the bears, and I was saying it's going to be fine. She was really worried I was going to take her on a long expedition by foot. And she kept saying, "Mum, I think the bears are really quite big." And I'd say, no, they're just small bears, I think. And it'll be fine. And then gradually we got more and more warnings about bears. So I said, okay, we won't go for a long walk in these woods. But we went over a mountain pass. And this is at a hot waterfall, which the whole notion of hot water coming out of the ground is quite fantastic. So as yet, I have no idea how I will work with this, but I very much hope I will. But we saw a bear. In truth, we didn't see this bear, but the person who did take a photograph, there was another couple there. I was so excited about seeing a bear, I forgot to take any film at all. But we were next to, literally, we saw two actually, a big male and a female walking alongside the road. And because we were in the car, Stella didn't freak out. And it was so exciting. And they are like grizzly bears. They're enormous. So Stella was right on that occasion. It was a good job we didn't go exploring by foot. But they are amazing, and it's a real privilege to be amongst wild animals like it was in Namibia. And then we went over this mountain pass, and the day before we went over it, it was in snow and impassable. So this incredible juxtaposition of cold weather, and yet this is steam just rising out of a river. So we're looking onto the Kuril Islands there, which I, again, because of the excitement of Russia, I felt very pleased about. And then Kyoto, I'm just realizing, okay, I'm going to rush now. So Kyoto, my last stop, I cut my Hokkaido visit short because I understood how, in a sense, how disabling it was not having a guide, and that was something to be explored on my next trip. It meant that we had a couple of days in Kyoto, and oh boy, what a couple of days. Yukiko had brilliantly, when I rang her to say we were heading to Kyoto, she booked us into her favourite B&B, which was a traditional house in the old part of Kyoto, and it is so beautiful, Kyoto. We couldn't get over it, and she told us to get up very, very early in the morning to go to one of the temples, and we had taken the train from Hokkaido all the way to Nagoya in one day because of the brilliance of Japanese trains. It was exhausting, and then to get up very early, but it was so worth it. Of course, not drains, but I also like things like this very much. And wow, you can imagine why I would like that. That was very inspiring for me to go. I know this temple shrine gets incredibly busy with people, but I found this alleyway of bleeding light and the vermilion poles just absolutely extraordinary.
Not too many spiders.
No, I didn't see spiders actually on this occasion, but I absolutely loved it. It was really crowded with people, but it was still very beautiful. And also the Tofukuji temple, is that right? The garden, really beautiful garden. And again, these incredible boards on their bridges. And something that Mami told me about, this lovely idea of a threshold between a house or temple and a garden called Engawa, and then these extraordinary gardens. But I'm sorry, I'm rushing now because I know it's taking a bit long. So this is the last leg of the talk. I was incredibly privileged. There is someone, a friend of mine, put me in touch with a woman called Kimiko who lives in Tokyo, and she said, "I'm so pleased you're coming to Kyoto. I'd like to introduce you to a potter." This potter is Raku Kichizaemon the 15th, who is a 15th generation tea bowl maker who comes from the line of Shojiro, who worked with Senno Rikyu, who is the great tea master of Japan, who I guess it's in the 16th century, isn't it? He greatly simplified what had become quite a complex and pompous ceremony. He re-simplified it and worked and collaborated with Chojiro. And Chojiro began by sort of revolutionized tea bowl making by making these raku bowls that are very simple. I'm sure lots of you know about the incredible history of tea bowl making. And Kimiko had asked Raku-san if we could meet, and he was about to go to Italy, and it seemed like it was going to be a little bit too much, but brilliantly she showed him the BBC4 programme with the fast axe, and he loved the fast axe because he works with fire, and so he agreed to meet us, and it was such a beautiful encounter. I think because we went to his museum. He has the most lovely museum in the outskirts of Kyoto, and they show all the different generations of potters in this museum, from Shojiro onwards, and give you descriptions of each master. And so we went to the museum and spent the afternoon there, and then we went to his house, and we were invited into their tea room. And first of all, his wife gave us bowls of tea, and my bowl was one of Raku-san's bowls. And she was incredibly gracious. She told us a really wonderful story about my bowl because it had been mended. And I can't really tell you it all now because it's a long story, but basically a cat got into his workshop, and a cat got into the workshop and their dog discovered the cat, and they had an incredible chase around the workshop and broke really a lot of his bowls, and particularly some of them that he knew were very important part of a sort of revelation, in a sense, as work does go in moments of revelation. So, and he was so upset about the bowls that were made that he just became very unwell for a period of time, and she brilliantly picked up all the shards, and she got some of these bowls mended, and this is one of them. So it's called cat bowl. These bowls have amazing names, and I'm really sorry because my Japanese pronunciation won't be very good. But this one is made in 1993, called Soiba, or Wind-Blown Horse. The name deriving from a poem by Lee Hay, and this bowl is called Ware Utaiba Suki Haikai. I'm sorry, Jason, this is terrible Japanese. The moon wanders with me as I sing. Again, the title from the poem. But once his wife, who's really elegant, had given us tea and and a Japanese suite. Raku-san came into the room on his own, and he's a very, very slender man in his 60s, but he looks incredibly young. And he just has a very, very lovely presence, a very still presence to him. And we just began talking about work, and I guess the fire stack was the first point of talking. But the more we spoke, the more we seemed to discover really profound things in common. And I then felt moved to show him some of the pigment work that I showed you earlier on in the talk, and also some of those blocks channeling light, which I'm going to come back to, but I just want to show you some of these amazing balls. This is still the moon wanders with me as I sing. And this is a black raku yakiniku type of bowl called Shin Unni Ukande, floating in a cloudburst. And it's inspired by, its title is inspired by a poem he wrote, and I'm just going to give you a short extract. Carried by the wind, the cloudburst travels through valleys. The high clouds rise, gathering deep indigo light. Black copper clouds sink, shimmering, dense with gloom, hoisting a flattering flag of clouds, to sail the world on a ship of smoke, all dusk beneath the eyes, smouldering in white cloud. This final bowl is called Katsura Bune, the Katsura Riverboat, and this is one of his more recent works. But as we began speaking, he also then went and got a beautiful book, and he has designed this extraordinary, it's called the Raku Kichizaemon Pavilion within the Sagawa Art Museum that's about 2 hours outside Kyoto, sorry. And we were talking about channeling light and passageways of light. And he has created this incredible building where he has dug, well, obviously he's had engineers, he's been collaborating, it's won many, many architectural awards. The idea was to have a space where he could show his pottery that starts right underground and gradually works its way up to the light. And it just felt, I suppose, so not to be over enthusiastic, but it was probably, I don't think I've ever met an artist where I felt so much connection. This is one that I ought to be telling you what it is exactly. These are, some of them are tea rooms and some of them are, this is semi-underground, and it leads to a small tea room. And his son is a sculptor who works with this beautiful black Zimbabwean stone. So he collaborated with him to make this beautiful wash basin, again using also natural light. And this is one of the small tea rooms within the museum. And the larger tea room, when it's closed with these extraordinary sliding screens, and then when it's open. So, if it's all right, Jason, I'm going to finish with a very, very short film. Yes, if there are any architects in the room, I would very much like to work with you. That would be great. I think the idea of collaborating with architecture in that way, I'm really connected with. But I just want to leave you with a very intense flavour of very, very current work.